This is the Self-Employed Mum podcast, the raw, honest truths of what it takes to be a mum and an entrepreneur. Running a business while raising small humans is an entirely different ballgame, and if you, like me, are in the thick of it right now, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Rhiannon Loudon, mom of two, proud entrepreneur, and CEO of two small businesses. And my guests, women who are juggling all the plates, building businesses while raising the next generation. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to like, follow, and spread the word to help keep this podcast going. Now on to today's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Self-Employed Mum podcast. I am your host, Rhiannon Loudon, and I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you for listening. I don't know if this is your first time listening in or if you're a regular listener, but I so appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I hope that, as always, you hear something today that is helpful or relatable or makes you feel a little bit less alone in this chaotic world of motherhood and entrepreneurship. This is episode 40 of the podcast, which is amazing. When I started this podcast, I don't know what I thought was going to happen with it. If I'm being honest, it was just a little bit of a dream. It was an idea that I had had for a while, and I thought I might as well just start and see what happens. And I'm so happy that it is still going strong and has actually grown arms and legs in a lot of ways. So I'm trying something a little bit different for this episode. It's going to be a solo episode, so sorry you're stuck just with my voice for today. And the reason I'm doing that is because this episode is airing on Valentine's Day 2024. And I've never been much of a fan of Valentine's Day, but I do love the idea of Galentine's Day. And I love the idea of celebrating different kinds of love that aren't just romantic. The romantic stuff is great too, but not particularly relevant to this podcast or what I'm going to talk about today. So I wanted to talk about two different kinds of love on this day of love that have been particularly helpful to me in my business and also in my personal life and how I feel about myself and the way that I speak to myself. So I am going to start by talking about female friendships. So Galentine's Day is the day before Valentine's Day, the day that I'm actually recording this episode. Galentine's Day is kind of a fun idea. I don't know who gets to take credit for inventing it, but my introduction to it came from Parks and Recreation, one of my absolute favorite shows. And if you are familiar, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not, Amy Poehler's character is really big on celebrating female friendships, and she really puts a ton of time and effort into making her friends feel valued, and she comes up with this idea about Galentine's Day and celebrating all of the amazing women around you. So I think that's a great idea. And if I'm being honest, I have a bit of a tricky relationship with girlfriends. Without going into a big long story, I had a particularly bad experience with some very mean girls when I was about 12, and not that I didn't have any female friendships after that, but I definitely shied away from them a bit, especially larger groups of girls. I had a couple of close girlfriends, and other than that, I mostly liked to hang around guy friends who I felt were a little bit more upfront, a little bit less gossipy, and I think my trust was really gone with bigger girl groups, if you will. So that kind of continued on into my university days. And it was really not until I moved over to Scotland from Canada, so land on this new continent, other than my husband and his family, who I've met twice in my life, I don't really know anybody else here. And not only have I moved to a new continent, but I'm also changing career. I'm going from working a comms job back in Canada and doing some photography part-time to focusing solely on my photography career. So obviously lots of big changes going on. Fast forward a couple of years and I'm pregnant with my first baby. I'm trying to build up this business, and that is when I was sort of reunited with the idea of female friendships and communities of women. And honestly, I cannot explain to you the difference that this has made in my life. From the motherhood side of things, it was the biggest, most massive change. I think it is probably the biggest change that can ever happen in your life, becoming a mum. And had I not met so many powerful and inspiring and encouraging and supportive women at that point in my life, I honestly don't know how I would have got through those early days and weeks and months of motherhood. And on the other side of that, the entrepreneurship side, meeting other women who were achieving their dreams and who had the guts to go for it and start these amazing businesses and grow these amazing businesses. I really think I needed that inspiration and that support around me to keep going through the tough times. And, if I look back over the last few years, that's my business has survived 2 pregnancies and 2 mat leaves and 2 adjustments to, first becoming a mom and then adding another child to our family. It has survived COVID, which was obviously another massive obstacle. It has survived house moves and DIY renovations and now some really kind of difficult health stuff going on with my youngest. And I really, truly do not think that I would have made it through that, definitely not my businesses, without this amazing circle of women around me. So I wanted to share, I guess, a few tips if you are feeling alone. Maybe you don't have that amazing circle of women, or maybe you've got some great friends, but they aren't mums, or you've got some great friends, but they aren't entrepreneurs, and you just feel like you don't have those people in your life who get it, who really get what you're going through. I thought I would think back to how I managed to meet all of these amazing people. So obviously a lot of this happens organically as you grow your business and you meet different people, whether you're at different events, maybe you're selling at markets, maybe you're collaborating on a creative project, or styled photo shoot, or there's so many different places that I have sort of met other amazing women in business. But sometimes it's as easy as, who are you chatting with on Instagram? Do you end up having conversations back and forth over DM? Do you find that you are always commenting on the same person's post because they're super relevant to you, or vice versa? Are the same people always commenting on your posts? As much as, social media brings a lot of negative into the world, I have found so much positive through the people that I've met on social media. Some of my most favorite clients, some of the people that, I have working with or for me now as freelancers or collaborating with, some people that I would honestly call friends, even though I've never met them face to face, which sounds a bit silly, but honestly, it's such a great way to kind of meet new people and have a conversation with somebody who gets it without really having to put yourself out there in person. But that brings me on to my next point, which is how wonderful it is if you can put yourself out there in person. So I remember when I first moved over here, reaching out to a couple of photographers and a couple of makeup artists and people who had followed me back online and just asking if they'd be willing to meet for coffee and just chat about what the industry's like over here. And I have always been an extrovert. I have always liked meeting new people and being out and being around people, but I lost a lot of confidence when I moved over here. I think part of it is being in a new place. You've got no support network. You don't know anyone. Nowhere is familiar. And as much as, even though we speak the same language, my accent was different. I had different slang. I had different expressions, and I don't know, I felt it just really knocked my confidence. So it was quite scary to ask somebody to meet for coffee or a drink. But I started out that way, and then I went to a couple of sort of networking events, joined a couple of online communities for other photographers and other branding experts in the area. And in no time, I just kind of felt like I had found my people. And I think it did feel sort of forced or scary at first, but the more I put myself out there and got involved in these different places, the more it happened organically. And then from there, maybe you meet one friend and then they connect you with someone else who they think you'd get on really well with or work really well with. And it really does grow arms and legs. It's just putting yourself out there in the first place. I think also it is hard sometimes to get over this idea of your competition and other people around you who offer a similar product or service. But I cannot begin to explain how valuable the relationships that I have built with other photographers and other branding experts has been for me personally and for my business. And I think having the attitude of community over competition makes such a big difference. Now, does that mean that you are never going to see one of your colleagues get the booking that you wanted and feel a little bit upset, or see them winning an award that you also put your name forward for and didn't win? Like, these kinds of things, of course, are going to crop up, and you're only human. And it doesn't mean that you're never going to feel at all jealous or at all like, oh, maybe they are competition. But I think it's just shoving those thoughts out of your head when they come in, and finding the people that you can chat openly and honestly about. And do you know, when you find those people, it makes such a big difference to talk to somebody who gets it. And I mean, any other small business owner will get it to some extent, but someone who's actually in your industry. And for me, you know, when I was focusing primarily on trying to get more wedding bookings in, the first year that I was really properly busy with it, I struggled so much with the editing and keeping on top of the editing. And if I'm being honest, that is still a struggle because it's not my favorite part of the job. I like being out and with people and in this sort of creative and planning phase. And I think being able to talk to somebody else who understands how much time and energy editing takes, specifically things that are specific to your job, makes all the difference. So if you can find somebody else who also adopts that community over competition mindset, that makes a massive difference. And if all of that just seems too scary and you're looking for somewhere to start, finding podcasts like this one, since you're listening in, can make a big difference in just helping you feel a little bit less alone. Find a podcast that's specific to your industry, or other small business podcasts, or other motherhood podcasts, anything that makes you feel less alone. And that might be the first step to just helping you get out of your shell and connecting with other people in your industry. So those are, I guess, the 4 or 5 things that have helped me the most in terms of generating a sort of support network and building a community of people around me that inspire and encourage and are there for the really tough days. And, you know, I know I've said it already, but I honestly do not think I would be where I am today without those people. I've done a little Instagram post about this as well, and just shouted out to some of like my kind of closest gal pals, if you will. So if you want to pop over to my Instagram at smallfishbrandco, you can take a peek at their stuff and give them a follow if you like. They are all lovely, supportive, encouraging mum slash entrepreneurs. And now I'm going to move on to the other area of love that I think is very relevant to building and growing a business and building and growing your career. And that is self-love and care. Now, I am not talking about, shall we say, sexual self-love. What I'm talking about here is shouting out about how great you are, about giving credit where credit is due, not just to the people around you, but to yourself, to making time for self-care and not feeling guilty for it. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your business or your family or anybody else who needs your love and attention in your life. And I think if I'm being honest, this is something that I still struggle a bit with. I feel that my days and my weeks are so busy just between trying to keep my 2 businesses going, stay on top of everything around the house, give the girls lots of time and love and attention. I also have a dog and a cat and a husband and all of it, a fabulous group of friends, all of whom need and deserve my time and attention. And sometimes I feel guilty when I take time out just for me. And this is something that I'm really working on. I have actually started working with a transformational coach, and that's something that I was always a little bit unsure about, probably a topic for another episode. But I've started working with her on some sort of things that I feel are holding me back. And we've been talking a lot about how I spend my time and making time for things that aren't goal orientated. And I think a lot of us do that. Like, if somebody asks me, do you make time for yourself? I'll say, well, sure, I make sure I get to the gym a few times a week, get out for a couple of runs. I try and allow myself time to read and to write at least a couple of nights a week. And she stopped and asked me, okay, but do you ever do anything for yourself that doesn't have to do with an end goal, where you're not working towards achieving something? And I had to stop and think about it, and I was embarrassed to say, not really. Occasionally, yes, I will make time to go meet up with a friend for coffee or take a browse around some charity shops, but it's really few and far between. It's certainly not something that I make time for every week. And I do think that any time that I dedicate, or that I would call time for me, it does always have an end goal in mind, whether that's getting fitter and healthier, trying to take care of my mental health, trying to work ahead on my book, or it's very seldom that I would just say, I feel like going out for a nice coffee and a browse around a record shop, for example, something that I love to do and never happens. And so I've been thinking a lot more about that and how important it is to allow ourselves that time without feeling guilty. And so whatever your sort of favorite things to do are, whatever you would do if you had a free day and nobody needed you, those kind of things. So maybe we can't afford a free day in our busy lives, but we can probably afford a free half an hour or an hour once a week to do something just solely for us. And so that is something that I'm committing to moving forward. Maybe that's something you want to think about as well. And obviously the self-care side of it, though, does also include things that help our mental health and our physical health. And it's that whole you can't pour from an empty cup analogy, which I think is really good and really true. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't be a good mom or a good partner or a good business owner. We really do need to make time for ourselves, and whatever that may be. Maybe that's taking a long bath every night. Maybe that's going to bed early. Maybe that's making sure that you get to the gym or get out for that run. Everybody's needs are kind of different, but I think it is so important to make time to take care of yourself. On the other side of this, I want to talk about celebrating your wins. So imagine if your friend set a goal at the start of the year, and 6 months in, your friend achieved that goal and they told you about it. Guaranteed you would make a big fuss about it, and you'd be super proud of them, and you would celebrate, and you might even offer to take them out for a drink or a celebratory coffee and cake. We all support our friends in that way. We all chat our friends up and celebrate their achievements. But for some reason, we don't do it with ourselves. So often we hit a goal or we achieve that big thing that we wanted to achieve, and we just tick it off the list and get on with it without telling anyone or allowing ourselves time to appreciate that goal that we've hit and that milestone that we've made it to. And I think it maybe isn't just the female thing, and I don't want to gender stereotype, but I do think for a lot of us women who have maybe been brought up in the 80s and the 90s particularly, we were kind of taught to be humble. We were taught to quietly celebrate these things, not to be too confident or too boasty, or and I really think that's ingrained in a lot of us now in such a way that we undermine our wins, and we shouldn't. We should be celebrating our wins. I don't know if you're anything like me, but I find a lot of the time I set a goal and I hit the goal and I'm proud of myself for a minute, and I'm already thinking, but what's the next thing I want to achieve? Or oh, look at all those people who are further ahead than me. So I'm slowly learning the power of stopping and just allowing myself to look at how far I've come. Even if once a month or once every quarter, you just look at all of the goals you've hit, whether they're small things or big projects that you've achieved. Look at how far you've come from the beginning to where you are now. I know some people have a board above their desk where they write their achievements, so they're looking at it all the time. I think too often we focus on the things we aren't achieving or the perceived mistakes that we've made. And really, we don't give ourselves enough credit where credit is due. So that's another thing I am working on this year and I'm slowly getting better at, is celebrating the wins, looking at how far I've come and making a bit of a fuss when you hit a goal. Don't just brush it under the rug and move on to the next thing. Give yourself a chance to celebrate and shout out loud about it. Tell your friends about it. Find people who will celebrate your wins with you. That will make all the difference. And I think I have somehow organically brought that back to the power of finding your community and celebrating together. Many of you will know that I co-host, we call them networking events, but really they're small biz meetups in Glasgow, and we run the events once a month. And something that we do kind of most months, depending on what's going on. This last one we did a chocolate tasting, so we didn't get around to it. But most months, that is what we do. We celebrate each other's wins. We go around, and anybody who wants can share something they've achieved that month. And you can just see the pride in the room. You can see somebody shares their achievement and they're a little bit humble and they're almost looking a little bit nervous to share it. And then as they're telling their story, you see the other faces in the room and everybody's face is lighting up and they're smiling and their body language changes. And by the time the first person finishes their story and is finished talking about whatever goal they've achieved, however big or small, everybody's like, oh, good for you, that's brilliant. Sometimes they clap, sometimes, and it's this energy that gets passed around the room. And the way that the person who shared that achievement, the way that their demeanor changes from kind of like humble and maybe a little bit nervous or embarrassed to share to this brilliant smile and glow on their face. No, we shouldn't need praise from other people, but it sure feels good when you're surrounded by this group of other women, all of whom are brilliant at what they do, and they are all celebrating your achievement, no matter how small. It's things like this that we need to do more of and focus on the good and focus on how far we've come. So if you are local to Glasgow, you should definitely come along to our networking events. You can find more info about that over at Small Biz Big Chat. I will pop that into the show notes as well. But I think I am going to wrap it up there. I don't want you to be listening to my solo voice much longer than that. I actually spoke a lot longer than I planned on. But I really believe wholeheartedly in celebrating your wins, in finding your community of people, and the power of those two things, the difference that they can make in your business. It's one thing when everything's going well and everything's progressing and you're managing all of the different hats that you wear in your life. But when things get tough, you need that circle of people around you and you need to remind yourself of how far you've come. And if you can do those two things, I think you will find the progress comes from there. Sometimes it is just putting one foot in front of the other and pausing and looking back at just how far you've come. I hope that has given you a little bit of perspective on this day of love. I hope that it has made you think about the people around you who maybe deserve a little shout out, or inspired you to reach out to somebody who you have found inspiring or encouraging, or who's been there for you in some small way. And I hope most of all that this has given you a little bit of perspective on why you should celebrate yourself, why you should make time for you, why you should make time for self-care, both of those things guilt-free, and why you should celebrate your wins and all of the progress you've made up until that point. I know it sounds silly and probably a bit cliche, but we do need to give ourselves a little love and give our businesses a little love as well. It's easy to downplay how brilliant we are at what we do and how great our products and services are when we're surrounded by so many other brilliant businesses. But you are the only you, and celebrating that in itself is definitely worth some love today on this day of love. I will leave it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will pop my information in the show notes along with information about Small Biz Big Chat in case you would care to join a fabulous community of friendly, encouraging, and supportive group of Scottish women in business. And I hope that you will share this episode with someone you know who is needing a little bit of love today, or if you're listening long after Valentine's Day, needing love at any point. We shouldn't just celebrate this stuff one day a year. So thank you so much for listening in. If you don't already like and follow the podcast, please do. It makes a big difference in keeping this small podcast going, and it also means that you get first access to new episodes when they come live. I would so appreciate it if you would let me know what you thought of this episode, what you're thinking of the podcast. You can connect with me over on Instagram at Smallfish Brand Co. And if you are looking for a new woman in business pal who is also juggling motherhood, I am your girl. Drop me a DM, and I am always looking to expand my community of like-minded women.